Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. Another one. And another one.
Oh, I won't lie, it's hot in that. Oh, blimey. Oh, I know some of you might expect me to come out here in a Grey Knight cosplay, dancing around, doing some fun stuff. We ain't got the budget for that. Trust me, I checked, they're like $7,000 and we might need 1 or 2 more patrons before we can afford to do that. But talking about patrons, there is a giveaway for you guys to do with this video, so make sure you check the Patreon page. But with all that being said, let's get into this review.
For we are the Hammer. DaemonHunters.
The Emperor!
Chaos Gate DaemonHunters. What is it?
It's XCOM but 40k!
I'm not denying that Chaos Gate DaemonHunter is not similar to XCOM. In fact, they do copy a lot from it. But the combat is just one element of the game, and there are many others that need to be recognised, and I think just saying it's XCOM kind of glances over all the other unique things that the developers integrated into the game. It also doesn't do justice for the amount of love they've put in regarding Warhammer 40k, and it's not just as simple as a reskin XCOM with Space Marines, and if you're a Warhammer fan, you will appreciate that. Chaos Gate DaemonHunters is a fast, turn-based strategy game where you take control of a squad with different stats and abilities against hordes of enemies in a story-driven campaign. Many of you may know there was a Warhammer 40k Chaos Gate released back in 1998. I've never played it, but it's something I would like to go back and do a retrospective at some point. Personally, I don't know why Chaos Gate DaemonHunters felt the need to use the Chaos Gate name. The game could have easily stood on its own 2 feet just being called DaemonHunters like Mechanicus. However, the developers did state they were looking to make a more modern version of Chaos Gate, so that's fair. Chaos Gate DaemonHunters was developed by Complex Games. They were founded over 20 years ago, so they've been making games for a while. I'm personally not too familiar with many of their games, however I do know they were the developers behind Horus Heresy Drop Assault, which is a mobile game, but as far as mobile games go, it's one of the better ones. I do hope that one day we get an actual AAA Horus Heresy game, but I can only dream at the moment. But this does show that Complex Games have some Warhammer fans in their studio, so I'm sure getting the opportunity to make Chaos Gate DaemonHunters was great for them. I also think it's fair to say that Chaos Gate DaemonHunters was a big step up from what their studio had previously been putting out. I actually had the chance to ask a few questions to the developers of Chaos Gate DaemonHunters with Colonel Danders, and it became quite a romantic event for just the 2 of us in our group. Speaking to developers and modders is something I love doing, and it's the main reason why I started doing YouTube, hoping that I get to meet the people behind making games. You truly hear the passion behind their work, and honestly I feel it's sad sometimes you don't see that side of things. The funny thing is we had half an hour between us, and I came prepared with over like 12 questions just in case that did happen. One of the questions that really stood out to me was how long the developers have been working on the game. Over 5 years. As soon as I heard that, I knew I wanted to give Chaos Gate DaemonHunters a review worthy of their work. In Chaos Gate DaemonHunters, you play as the Grey Knights. If you're a guardsman,
Yes, sir.
they are the very last Space Marine chapter you want to see, other than maybe the Night Lords. There actually is some guardsmen lurking around in the game, so I'm sure they will be getting a visit soon. The Grey Knights are a pretty cool chapter. Most other chapters are not even aware of their existence other than maybe 1 or 2 like the Space Wolves, and it's their job to fight demons on a daily 9 to 5 basis. Unlike the other chapters, the Grey Knights were implanted with the Emperor's gene seed directly, and they're all psychers, which means they can use their minds to do cool party tricks. Your enemy is the Death Guard. They are the Space Marine chapter that has devoted themselves to Papa Nurgle, where you don't need to worry about hygiene, and being overweight is considered a blessing. Having your guts on the outside of your body is considered a fashion statement, and you are very hard to kill. The story starts with you playing as Agravain, who is a commander of a strike force of Grey Knights. Agravain has been leading a long campaign and finally reaches his goal of going toe-to-toe with a greater demon of Khorne. This sets the stage for an amazing campaign you're going to have with Agravain. Never mind, he's dead, let's move on. Agravain dying means you, the unnamed hero of this story, becomes the commander. At this point you're introduced to your comrades on board the strike cruiser the Baleful Edict. You have Ektar, the experienced Grey Knight veteran, who has trauma in his past so doesn't want to take on the role of commander himself, but will give you his advice and expertise where needed. And you have Lunette Dominus. She puts the tech priests in Mechanicus to shame by telling you on multiple occasions how in love with the Baleful Edict she is. Dominus is willing to sacrifice all the Grey Knights on the ship if it will keep the Baleful Edict going for another day, like a true tech priest of Mars. After that long campaign, you were looking forward to some annual leave back on the homeworld of the Grey Knights, Titan. However, then comes the Inquisitor.
You've heard of this Inquisitor. Only as a myth, a dark fable, a horror tale, told across the flickering embers of a midnight fire, wherever hardened space dogs gather to drink fermented vegetable products and compete in tales of blood-chilling terror.
A simple yes would have sufficed.
Vakir is the last member of your party, and her class is Inquisitor. She brings a distress call from an astropath talking about some new disease called the Bloom. And with her authority, by seizing the Baleful Edict, your adventure starts. During this story, you fight across the sector trying to prevent the Bloom against the forces of Nurgle. I'm not entirely sure when the story takes place, however I do believe it takes place during the Plague Wars. There's a few things to support this. First, this is when a bunch of Nurgle's plagues were infecting the Imperium. Secondly, the Ultramarines are fighting the Death Guard, but they're also fighting the Word Bearers, and that's actually a nice little Easter egg hinting back to the original Chaos Gate. But if you've ever read the Dark Imperium novels, the Grey Knights were involved, and I like to think we're playing another strike force involved in that conflict. You don't need to read them, but they do give some great descriptions of how the Death Guard and Nurgle operate, and a lot of that has been put into this game, but it's not needed. Another novel series I recommend reading is the Eisenhorn series. This will give you a bit more insight in how Inquisitors operate, but once again, it's not needed. Chaos Gate Demon Hunter's story is told through cutscenes and every now and then in levels, but I'm genuinely surprised they didn't have a fluff one. If you're a new person to Warhammer 40k, you ain't getting anyone holding your hand here. Instead, you're dropped into the deep end of the lore. But that's not to say the developers haven't introduced ways you can find out more in-game. After key moments in the story or particular missions, the characters will have interactions you can do with them to discuss or ask advice. This is where a new person will have the chance to find out more details about 40k. For example, what is Chaos and its gods? Who is Nurgle and why is it a threat to us? Who and what are the Grey Knights, Adeptus Mechanicus and Inquisition? I do love that the lore is there for you to learn, but as the story progresses, it becomes more about the characters and the current situation. More on that later.
It seems your crusade ends here.
Let's get into those spoilers. Once the Inquisitor has seized the Baleful Edict, she wants to get a hold of one of the local Poxwalkers on Coromar Prime, which is where the astropath says the Bloom will spread from. Once you find a Poxwalker with a Bloom seed, Vakir wants to take it back on board the Baleful Edict. Obviously this triggers both Dominus and Ektar for a number of reasons to do with contamination and chaos, but they allow it. However, this is just the start of the conflict between the three of them. Vakir examines the Poxwalker and does find a seed from the Bloom, but it's damaged and she needs one in good condition. You then get a meeting with Grandmaster Kai, who wants to make the statement,
You have seized a Grey Knight strike cruiser.
As is my right.
Kai wants to know why using the Grey Knights to deal with a couple of Poxwalkers is needed, to which Vakir replies they are only the beginning of the plague. Vakir then continues to ask for more support from Titan, to which Kai replies it would need to be earned by proving this is a true threat. This sets the standard for future reports between Kai and Vakir, and what I love is it shows the conflict within the Ordo Malleus. So after some more research, you learn that the seeds are fragments of some warp-touch archaeotech that's been around before the Horus Heresy. Once again, this is where you see conflict, as Ektar simply wants to purge the seeds instead of researching them, but this leads to one of my favourite lines in the game.
I would rather we simply purged them.
That is the difference between us, Purifier. You are the hammer, but I am the one with the burden to wield it.
Vakir believes the seeds originate from somewhere, which is where she requires more, and this leads to Dominus not being too keen.
You would have us limp around the sector with more of this corruption in my hold?
If you speak to Dominus after, she further explains how machine spirits can be corrupted by chaos, and that she had the chance to study a Predator tank from the Black Legion which was also corrupted in a similar way to the archaeotech. It's nice little details like that for people to learn that flesh out the characters more. After collecting a few more seeds from Poxwalkers and the Death Guard, Vakir finds out these seeds are leaving a psychic signal to the heart of an Eldari craft world. Once again, Ektar is not happy with Vakir's methods of using the Immaterium to find the source of chaos when she's only a human. There's some great conversations with Ektar afterwards, since he has fought the Eldar before and explains how they fight, but also from Dominus, who explains what an Eldari craft world is, and that usually Slaanesh is the one that's interested in their souls than Nurgle. When you reach the craft world, Vakir and your strike force are sent down to investigate, and you soon reach the source of the signal in the heart of the craft world, where you find a sleeping avatar of Cain. This is where you find an Eldari infinity circuit, which is basically an afterlife for the Eldari for their souls. However, Nurgle has corrupted it. Ektar gives the order to destroy it, but Vakir overrules and wants to commune with it. Once again, it shows how the Ordo Malleus doesn't always get along. This results in a badass scene of warp fuckery with Vakir and the avatar of Cain. She finds out that the Infinity Circuit is actually a nursery for 5 strains of the bloom, one of which has already flowered that the Poxwalker had. At this point, you're jumped by the Death Guard and the Demon Prince Cadex, who turns out to have a history with Inquisitor Vakir. As you fight the demons and Death Guard, all seems lost until Caldor Drago shows up, which I was not expecting. There actually was hints to him early on in the story if you spoke to Ektar, since apparently Dominus served underneath him for many campaigns. Caldor Drago does have lore behind him, so if you're new, you won't understand why he's here. Unfortunately, I can't take him seriously anymore after watching the Flash Gits meme about him being a crackhead for warp dust, which is now officially canon in my head. But Caldor Drago appears and helps deal with the oncoming Nurgle forces in time for you to escape. However, due to him being cursed and must return to the warp, he can't stop the other strains of the bloom flowering and leaves the craft world. Due to Vakir messing around with the bloom, the other strains have germinated all over the sector. Ektar is pissed again with the Inquisitor, and Dominus is complaining about the ship. Vakir explains each of the new strains gets its power from a Reaper or a boss battle that contains a prime seed, and wants to track them down by attaching a piece of the Eldari Infinity Circuit to the ship. This does not sit well with Ektar again, because Chaos plus Xeno Archaeotech equals bad.
You stand on the precipice of heresy.
I just love how pissed off Ektar looks in this clip.
Would you honestly prefer we defy the direct orders of your chapter lord?
No.
At the same time, a number of Morbus gates are being opened which you need to prevent, and if you don't, the bloom will spread to other sectors. Vakir later explains each of the new strains, which I'll talk about in gameplay mechanics, but she needs a certain amount of seeds to track the Reapers so we can kill them, so you set off on your journey to catch them all. Realistically, this takes like several hours. Once you've gathered enough seeds, Vakir then tracks the strain to the Reaper, which results in a boss battle.
Pop! Out of the egg came a tiny and very hungry caterpillar. He started to look for some food.
So you slay a couple of Reapers. During this time there's plenty more conversations to be had with the crew, for example the history between Dominus and Ektar. I love how Dominus gets straight to the point and always provides just purely percentage data. You have some background about Vakir being Authorian belief, that's basically people who look for the Emperor's presence in different people, and lastly Ektar's history, but I'll talk about that as a potential DLC or expansion. The most pressing matter is as Vakir tracks these Reapers, it's having a toll on her mind, and she becomes more and more distant from the group, and you'll start to notice the chaos corruption on Vakir. As you're preparing for the next Reaper, a Death Guard strike cruiser shows up. This leads to a sick cutscene of the strike cruiser fighting, but then the Death Guard go full kamikaze on you.
Emergency. There's an emergency going on. Still going on, and it's still an emergency.
Turns out this was led by Cadex, and his mission is to destroy the Codex Toxicus which finds the Reapers. Cadex succeeds in doing this but gets captured in the process. I love seeing a demon actually being binded with all the sacred stones, scriptures and purity seals. You read about it in the novels, but it's cool to see in game. Ektar of course wants to kill Cadex, but Vakir's like, no, not my precious demon prince, I love him. Cadex is a brilliant character. Even though he looks like a giant moth, the writing truly shows how demons are very smart in trying to manipulate mortals and Astartes alike. Vakir refuses to kill Cadex since she believes she can use him as a last-ditch effort to find out more about the bloom. Ektar once again is not happy as this has red flags all over it, and Cadex is just enjoying the theatre.
He not only questions your methods, but your authority as well.
Ektar finally comes to an understanding that if Vakir shows any sign of corruption, she will be shot. During the next round of talks, everyone is on edge about the demon and discussing Vakir's interrogation techniques.
They are like two starving hounds circling each other.
Vikir also explains her history with Cadex. Something about Cadex taking over a Medicaid that Vikir went for treatment from, but resulted in corrupting all the patients, which led to an exterminatus on the planet. So the interrogation starts, and Vikir goes into the mind of Cadex. Ektar is also ready point blank to put a round in her head. Vikir finds the demand on her mind exhausting, but does locate the roots of the bloom which lie in the garden of Nurgle. Cadex starts making fun of them having no hope to go there, but then makes the mistake of mentioning Caldor Drago. Since Drago can travel the warp and has access to the Titan Sword, he can destroy the roots in Nurgle's garden. This results in a plan to destroy the Prime Seeds you've collected from the Reapers to try and see if you can summon him for aid. You eventually find a suitable summoning ground. Vikir at this point looks like she's had a night out, and she's making Captain Titus touching the warp seem like a perfectly normal thing to do. She's clearly at her limits, but Ektar does seem concerned for Vikir's safety, and it's almost like he respects her for what she's gone through being only a human. Putting aside their previous conflict. So you summon Caldor Drago again, you warn him of the roots in the garden of Nurgle, and he agrees to trim it. However, Cadex warns his master of the plan. This results in a huge backlash on Vikir sending Drago into a trap.
Have we just damned the Supreme Grand Master to an ambush and death?
Precisely.
Ektar doesn't care anymore and goes straight away to execute Vikir, but Dominus stops him.
Oh no, now don't call me Techi. You know what happens when you call me Techi.
Are your logic pathways fried, Dominus?
Shows how strong a tech priest can be. Vikir then suggests they use Cadex by killing him.
Nani?
By killing or banishing Cadex, he'll return to his master in the Garden of Nurgle, allowing them to follow him and warn Caldor Drago. Vikir begins to banish Cadex, and the ritual is working, but Vikir still realises that tracking a demon throughout the warp is going to be near to impossible, but tracking a human psycho will be far easier.
Take my spirit.
Vikir!
A demon's essence cannot be tracked past the veil, but mine is now bound to his. I will blaze a path for you to follow.
You sacrifice yourself, you are doomed to an eternity of torment.
Vikir makes the ultimate sacrifice by giving her soul to Cadex in order for the Grey Knights to be able to track them together. One little detail I love is Nurgle's bell tolling in the background.
Now, the Grandfather calls. I must answer.
So you begin tracking them through the warp, and several weeks have passed. You finally meet the gatekeeper to the Garden of Nurgle, which is basically another one of the boss battles you didn't complete. Once you slay the gatekeeper, you reach the Garden of Nurgle and liaise with Caldor Drago, explaining it's a trap. He agrees to take 8 warriors with him, 4 to help him attack Cadex's master, and 4 to help defend whilst doing this. You finally meet the main antagonist of the story, Mortarion, and a lot of you did point out to me that he's not the first Primarch in a video game from my top 5 video. But actually seeing a physical model and being able to play against it, in my opinion, is something else. Even though Mortarion only gets a few bits of dialogue with Cadex, it's great to listen to, and treats him with no respect whatsoever.
Know your place, worm.
Obviously, Mortarion is eager to face Caldor Drago again after the history he has with him. You can read Mortarion's heart for a bit of backstory on that, but it's not needed. I'm still a bit unsure what Caldor Drago's current power level is in the lore, so someone will have to let me know.
The Morbus is at hand.
So you fight Mortarion, and since I can't talk about him later due to spoilers, the developers have made a beautiful model for him, which is exactly like the tabletop version. It doesn't feel half-assed at all, and his wings just brings it all together. I also love they try to transfer some of his tabletop rules into abilities, but have also given him new abilities on top of that. The animations flow smoothly, and you truly do feel like you're fighting against the Demon Primarch. Obviously, don't expect the power balance to be lore accurate because it's a video game, and we can't have your Grey Knights getting one shot. Then again, that would be the true XCOM experience. So Caldor Drago cuts the roots, which damages Mortarion's power.
Drago!
He then retreats like he always does. All of your knights can't leave, so they stay with Caldor Drago to continue the fight against Chaos. You return to Titan, where Ektar and Dominus do a farewell to Vikir, and the game ends. There is a post-credits scene hinting to a sequel or expansion with Vikir's soul being used for something. Personally, I would like to see it being traded with Tzeentch for a new story and faction, but I'll talk about what I would like to see in the future later. Overall, the story was brilliant. It was written by Aaron Dembski-Bowden, and I'm glad GW writers are getting the opportunity to work in video games, like Dan Abnett with Darktide. I wonder who will be doing Space Marine 2. Actually, many of you may not know, but the creative director of Space Marine 2, Oliver, has stated they are working with Black Library authors and the original creator of Space Marine, so the writing should be top quality. I could easily see myself reading or listening to a story like this, and I kind of wish we got some prequel novels about the Kyr. But definitely Cadex going from this self-confident demon prince to his last moments with Moltarion being terrified is one of the best depictions of a demon prince personally I've seen.
Protect your son!
A pitiful end awaits those who serve chaos.
The story has great opportunities for new players to learn lore, but also for Warhammer veterans to go deeper into certain characters, which is what the developers were aiming for.
That will both resonate with Warhammer veterans, as well as bring something really fresh to all fans of the genre.
The gameplay of Chaos Gate Demon Hunters is an unforgiving one. Oh, for fuck. The game starts by giving you access to your strike cruiser, the Baleful Edict. From there, you travel the sector, completing missions on planets by engaging the Death Guard and Nurgle demons to gain more resources. These resources are used to improve your knights, the Baleful Edict, and to progress the campaign. Whilst travelling to and from planets, you engage in decision making with random events occurring, and also with Grandmaster Kai. These decisions affect the outcome of rewards and benefits, and you repeat this gameplay for the majority of the campaign. If you don't know what you're doing, you might focus your efforts in the wrong area, which can leave you handicapped at the start of the campaign, making things more difficult. However, they may give you benefits in other areas you're not aware of. If a new player makes wrong decisions, the game is going to appear far harder for them than they might want it to be. If you then combine that with the XCOM style combat that every decision you make can lead to a death, the game can come off too much for new players looking for an easy turn-based game. For players that are familiar with hard turn-based games, you'll feel right at home with these choices. When it comes to Warhammer veterans, the early gameplay has you going up against Chaos cultists, and there's nothing more triggering to a Warhammer fan than seeing a Son of Titan get outclassed by a dude with a heavy stubber. All these factors then lead new players falling into the trap of concluding, well, this is fucking terrible. They leave a bad review and then never touch the game again. I mean, yes, if there's game-breaking bugs, 100% give it a thumbs down, and I will address my own personal issues with that later, trust me. Let me try to tackle these issues and rectify them for you. The issue of making a bad decision when you start is because the game gives you the option where to focus your resources. These come with brief tutorial messages telling you what they do, which can be missed. For speedrunners and people looking for a challenge playing a second time round, you will need to do these certain decisions to get achievements like completing the campaign under 500 days. These players will need to use their resources at the start of the game to progress the story, then buffing yourself up. This is where new players can make a mistake. Now, the difficulty should be expected with turn-based, and I'm going to disagree with people that the game should be considered bad because you find it too difficult. Go look at a game journalist review if you like that stuff. Actually, did anyone see the journalist gameplay for Darktide? Please give early access to people who actually play Vermintide than fucking game journalists. Now, for Warhammer veterans, my children, I hear you. It's frustrating to see this. However, if you can get past that into the later game and survive the early trap, your knights are going to be going up against greater demons, demon engines, and other things that should be killing you outright. And your knights start acting like Matt Ward is writing them. Perhaps Warhammer fans would have better received it if the cultists were taken out, but would then people complain about the Poxwalker damage or the Death Guard? You have to accept it's a video game, and it's still not as bad as this. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters has a lot of replayability, from the different knights you field to their subclasses and skill trees, the equipment you collect and decisions you make from travelling, where to invest resources on the Baleful Edict. You can definitely play the game more than once and have a different playthrough than someone else, which I love to see.
I am Tarka Dol, an ambassador of the great Vendelian Empire.
Silence, demon filth.
I need to make some Red Dwarf Warhammer 40k crossover merch. The gameplay mechanics can be broken down into 5 main areas: the combat, encounters, rewards and upgrades, the ship, and lastly the bloom. I'm going to start with the bloom as it affects a lot of the other ones. In Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, the bloom acts as 2 things: a timer and a difficulty scale. As you play the game, there will be bloom events occurring on planets, and there's always more than one, ensuring that you can't always get to all of them. They are indicated by the mark of Nurgle, and underneath you can see how infected the planet is out of 5. Depending on how infected the planet is, affects certain mechanics, such as the warp surge, the buffs enemies receive, and also how the environments look. If you complete a mission, this will reduce the amount of bloom on that planet. If you leave it unattended and the timer runs out, the bloom will increase. If left long enough, it will result in a Morbus Gate. This is a type of mission that can lead to you losing the campaign. Lose 5 of these missions and you've lost. The bloom also acts as a type of resource in the campaign. These are called seeds. These are used for upgrades on knights and Vikir's research. More on them later. That's the basics of the bloom, but we'll move on to combat. Before you go into a mission on a planet, a few things are shown and offered to you. The type of enemies you will be facing, these are usually hidden but can be revealed by the use of prognosticars. What the objective is, mission rewards, armory access, and the glorious deed. The glorious deed is a way for you to prove yourself as a Grey Knight by making the mission more difficult at the push of a button. For example, winning a mission without using grenades, or you're only allowed to take 3 knights down opposed to 4. And I love this mechanic, because you will have moments in the campaign where everything is going well for you. Your knights are full health, the Baleful Edict is not damaged, and you're looking for a challenge. This offers that, and it's not forced on you, and the reason I like it a lot is because you can't change the difficulty in the campaign once you've started. If you complete a glorious deed, you get more requisitions, which is a type of resource. However, if you fail, they sometimes give you a negative amount. One criticism I do have with glorious deeds is sometimes you can't complete them without having a certain research. A perfect example is collecting seeds. On missions, there's only a certain amount of ways you can get seeds, either by killing a carrier or finding a seed. The deed will ask you to collect more than there actually is on the mission, and you will need a research mechanic to complete this, and I feel that could have been more clearly noted. Once you're in a mission, you take turns against the Death Guard navigating your Grey Knights. Both the Grey Knights and the Death Guard operate on different but similar statistics. Starting with the Grey Knights, the basic information provides you with health, willpower, experience, armor, movement speed, focus, resistance, and resilience. Health is pretty obvious. You get hit, you lose health. Easy peasy. Just kidding, the best way to explain health is by talking about weapons. Nothing ever misses in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, similar to Mechanicus in that respect. This was a decision by the developers to remain different to XCOM. The game is more about positioning and being in the right place than pure luck, but they do have their own version of that as well. Every Grey Knight weapon in the game has a base damage value. This can be indicated by the red. On top of base damage value, some weapons have a crit chance and crit damage, which is shown by the yellow. This is your luck statistic when attacking, so you're always going to deal damage with the red, but the yellow is a gamble. Think of it like this. Weapon X does 5 damage. It has a crit chance of 50%. If it gets that critical hit, it does an extra 2 damage. So if the target has 7 health, it's dead. The Death Guard weapons, however, just operate on single damage basis with no crits, so you know exactly what damage you'll be taking. Willpower is your mana, magic, whatever you want to call it, to use psychic abilities, and it does 2 things. It either buffs an attack, or it allows you to use an ability.
Foul servant of the plague god, go back to your master!
Willpower could be used for teleporting, buffing a weapon with more range or damage, increasing the healing from an apothecary. You also have afflictions or effects, and there is a huge amount of them, from blinding an enemy making their ranged weapon useless, to full on dominating an enemy, which I fucking love. There's nothing more badass than bending a Hellbrute to be your bitch. It's like having a Dreadnought on your team as well. You also have knights like the Librarian and Chaplain that have even more abilities to use. I really appreciate the amount of options you get to choose from. In tabletop, the Grey Knights could pick psychic abilities from the Dominus discipline. In game, they've implemented similar abilities and then their own ones on top of that. You only have a certain amount of willpower, but you can get it back by killing enemies. For some reason, whichever Grey Knight gets the kill gets the willpower, so it's crucial to keep apothecaries in the swing of things. This is the same for experience as well. Whoever gets the kill gets more. After battles, knights can level up, which then you can unlock new abilities with. This is another mechanic that I feel should have been indicated to the player, and the reason I say this is because you can have a few knights that do all the killing. If those knights then get injured and your next mission you have to choose other knights, the power balance can be dreadful. This is because knights' health also go up with experience, so if you leave ones behind without being played or getting enough kills, those knights will get one shot by most things.
Today you will know my suffering.
We are the Hammer.
I will talk about this more later as well, as there is mechanics put in place to help with this. Every unit in the game has an armor value. For every 1 armor, it blocks 1 damage, and it resets every round. The reason you have armor is to first of all tank oncoming hits when it's not your turn, like an armor save, but you also use it to move through Overwatch when it is your turn. There are weapons as well that ignore armor, like melter guns, which I like to see as it's a nod to the tabletop. Movement is how many squares you can move. Obviously, big chunky boys in Terminator gear are going to move less. I honestly never thought we'd see Terminators again in a video game after Primaris. Thank the Emperor for Grey Knights. Focus is your knight's chance to trigger afflictions or autos. Afflictions are things like debuffs and buffs that I mentioned earlier, and autos are triggers that happen in certain situations. For example, your knight might have a weapon that has a 25% chance to parry an attack. If your focus is 40%, that chance will increase to 65%.
Strong we shall stand.
There's a lot to play around with, and it's fun buffing your knights to the point where some of their autos trigger 100% of the time. Another example is the Aegis Shield, which every knight has the ability to trigger, which gives you more armor on your turn. If you take a warding stave, this automatically triggers the shield at a chance. You can then buff your focus to guarantee it every time, making your knight a raid boss. Now of course Nurgle has their own abilities that cause certain effects on you too, which are also part of the afflictions, like making your movement terrible or disabling your melee. Your resistance is a percentage chance not to get afflicted by these negative effects. Resilience is your knight's lifeline. If your knight takes a bolt to the knee, it loses 1 resilience. If they hit 0, they are dead and you collect their gene seed. They can then be recycled, have a knight commune with them, which allows you to use their body to either add 1 ability point or to respec your ability points. If your knight takes a knee in combat, after 3 turns they will join the fight again but with half their HP. After the battle, that knight will need a certain amount of days to rest. This is one of the many mistakes new players make, is they get attached to a set of 4 knights and bring them back into combat before they've had time to recover. You're meant to have multiple knight teams you send down whilst others heal, but you're not told to do this, which is kind of cheeky. Moving on to enemies, they have 3 different statistics to take note of which the Grey Knights don't have. The first is how many seeds they are carrying. The second is what they are, being organic, mechanical or demonic. Certain weapons have buffs that provide benefits against the type they are fighting, so it's good to take note of. The last is stun. Every enemy will have a stun number. Every time you hit that enemy, even if you do no damage due to armor, the stun will decrease. Once it hits 0, the enemy will go into a down state. This leads to one of the most unique mechanics I've seen in a turn-based game, and I can't give enough credit to it. This is called precision targeting. When the enemy is in this state, if you bring a Grey Knight over to do another attack, it will offer which part of the body you want to do damage to. You can also get the enemy into this state if you land a critical hit with a melee weapon. Depending on what you attack, it will give a certain debuff, and every single enemy has this feature. So for example, if you attack a Death Guard Space Marine, you could disable his weapon, which will literally cut off their arm. You could do an attack that ignores armor, or you could execute. Executing usually is the best one to pick as it does kill the target outright, but there are situations where you may not do that. When you do execute, this gives all your Grey Knights an extra action point, which is quite OP if you chain this stuff. The precision targeting is even more practical on big enemies and bosses, and disabling their attacks, parts of their weapons and body is a satisfying thing to do. One thing that's not pointed out as well is depending on which side of the boss you attack depends on what you can attack. Moving on to some more details in combat, for the Grey Knights in the bottom left corner you are shown health, willpower, action points and ammo. Action points count as moving, shooting and using abilities. Ammo is an interesting mechanic because you have an infinite amount but you have to reload range weapons. I felt this was not needed, but it encourages you to get into melee than just staying away and shooting, but there are classes out there that suit that playstyle. Overwatch is of course here because it wouldn't be Warhammer 40k without it, and one thing that Overwatch is very useful for is stunning an enemy on their turn. If you know an enemy has 1 stun left, Overwatch on them point blank and you completely deny their turn. You can have a defensive playstyle with Overwatch, but you will find this less viable as you go against harder enemies, and it's far more practical for you to do damage on your turn and try and get that stun meter down. I haven't talked about AI up to this point, but whilst talking about Overwatch, it's a good time to. Chaos Gate DaemonHunters has a wide range of enemies that all provide a certain role in the heat of battle. You've got chaff or expendable enemies that want to get in your face, enemies that buff other enemies, enemies that deny area, enemies that want to tank damage, enemies that want to keep distance and deal high damage, and enemies in between that provide a few of these things combined. The AI of the enemy is to primarily do their one task on the battlefield, be that any of those things, and if they can't, move towards you or use Overwatch. In the early game, you fight a lot of cultists and plague marines, and their roles is to shoot you if they can, or to use Overwatch. And it's a rather boring playstyle to fight against, I agree, but there are ways to get around this by teleporting and using certain abilities, but you are low level and don't have your full range of options. It does feel like a chess match where you're only playing against pawns. Things are predictable, but it's not enjoyable. Once you get into the later levels, you see less of these pawns and more knights, bishops and rooks that aren't going to just spam Overwatch against you, and they will do their other roles. That's when you start to get some variety in gameplay. Now, the AI of the enemy won't evolve during gameplay. What I mean by this is there's no trigger for anything different to take place. Once you've played against a certain enemy, you know what it's capable of. For example, there isn't any sophisticated demon AI that tries to avoid knights if they know a weapon does more damage to it. Or let's say one of your knights dies and all the enemies try to rush you while you're weakened. I'm not expecting that personally. The pathing of the AI is genuinely okay. Sometimes they do walk back and forth for no reason. If you run away, I mean tactically retreat, sometimes they can be a little bit confused on what to do and just spam Overwatch. I don't think difficulty level affects the AI, more their stats. Now, this isn't a spoiler, but I do have some issues with the last mission's AI. So you're trying to stop some plague marines, but for some reason the developers decided they would take away these enemies' ability to shoot or damage you in their turn, and this is not told to you as far as I'm aware. Instead, they try to get past you or spam Overwatch, and I get the reasoning because of the mission, but this goes against the whole playstyle you've been learning up to this point in the game. It feels very unnatural and not fun. Other than that one mission, the AI is perfectly adequate for a turn-based strategy game. My word, we've got many more mechanics to talk about, which is getting me excited. There is a cover system that takes place, which is well indicated. Half cover provides -1 damage to the attack, and full cover negates it completely. And trust me, you're going to want to keep your ass close to cover. Another mechanic is stratagems. In the tabletop, you could use stratagems with command points. From what I've seen, they've not tried to implement the Grey Knight stratagems into the game because they don't work. In Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, they are a one-time use in combat that can get you out of a tricky situation. This could be healing a Grey Knight, cooling down a bombardment. There's quite a few to choose from. The Death Guard have their own version of this as well, which is called a Warp Surge. After every round, the bar at the top of the screen will increase. Two factors can make this increase faster, using willpower from your Grey Knights, or it depends on how infected the planet is with the bloom. When the bar fills up, there's a Warp Surge, and a random Death Guard stratagem will be played. This could be calling in reinforcements, causing one of your Grey Knights to get stuck, vomit showing up all over the floor that if you step in, you get a bleed effect. Another mechanic is the different strains of seeds, and there are 5 of them in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters. They provide different buffs and mutations to enemies. These are based around damage, health, armor, afflictions, and focus. Both Warp Surges and Seeds add another element to combat than just positioning and attacking, which I do like. There are certain mechanics in combat that do feel a bit unnatural, and a perfect example is when you run into enemies. In missions, there are patrols that move around as indicated, and I do like patrols, but there's no clear line of sight or range indicated to get spotted by these patrols. When you are spotted, all your knights get their action points back, which I do like, but what tends to happen is, you move one of your knights ahead of the party, and that knight gets caught with his dick. Never mind. But this is awkward because all your knights get their action points back, but that knight is far away from your team, and it encourages a playstyle to move your knights up slowly, one action point at a time to avoid this mistake. A simple way to fix this would be to indicate the line of sight of patrols, and to maybe give knights left behind their previous action points on top of the ones given when spotted. This might have been an intended mechanic though to punish newbies, and the difference between someone who's playing for fun and playing on Legendary. The last mechanic in combat I want to mention is destructible terrain, and I think this is one of the better things that sets Chaos Gate Demon Hunters apart from other Warhammer turn-based games. Games like Battle Sector only allowed you to damage certain areas, and Mechanicus didn't have any destructible terrain, but Chaos Gate Demon Hunters gives you the full go-ahead to destroy anything you see with an explosive weapon. It's terrific seeing a Hellbrute destroying half the map just trying to get towards you. However, one problem I do have with destructible terrain is it doesn't allow you to open new paths, which is not indicated very well. For example, you might destroy a wall that you think you can go through but you can't. On top of destructible terrain, they also allow you to use terrain to damage enemies. Things like using the top of a pipe as a full-on frisbee to attack enemies is just brilliant. Could you imagine being a plague marine or demon, being alive for thousands of years, and some dude ends you with Captain America's shield? You could be a heretic and destroy a statue of the Emperor to kill others, push a support pillar of a building to land on enemies, or use a crane to squish enemies. There's even small things like oil spilt on the ground that you can burn, and crates full of explosives which you can shoot. I would say destructible terrain is a required toolset to use because without it you're making missions far harder, because sometimes a single piece of terrain can kill a group of enemies or a large one. I want to talk quickly about the game's mission objectives. There are 4 types of missions in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, excluding boss battles or campaign events. The 4 types of missions are eliminate all seed carriers, this is as the name suggests, seek and destroy bloom spawn, which is kill Nurgle's trees, destroy the bloom spawn spreader, which in my opinion is fucking hard because this stupid plant does a huge amount of splash damage, plus you're against a timer that you need to keep up, and last the Morbus Gate, which is protecting the Inquisitor while she does a ritual. What I do like is these missions change depending on how far you are through the campaign. When you first start, you'll be doing seed carriers and bloom spawn, but as you get further, you'll be destroying the bloom spawn spreaders and Morbus gates. With the campaign missions on top, you are getting a nice variety, but I do feel these 4 missions can become a little repetitive. I'm not sure entirely why I think this. It might be because the maps are quite big and every objective requires you to go to almost the other side to complete it. I would have liked some missions that are perhaps different to destroying a target, but then again the Morbus gates are kind of like an escort / hold your ground mission in one. And if I can't think of a better mission type that can fit into the mechanics of the game, then I'm not going to criticise it. Boss battles I love. They have witty dialogue, you're straight into the fight with no pissing about, and each one is different. You also can't complete all the boss battles in one playthrough, only 4 out of 5. I really do respect the developers for not cramming in boss battles into the game reusing the same assets, like killing the same Great Unclean One 3 times as a mission type. They are one-off boss battles, as they should be. I've probably missed something in combat, but there's a lot there to cover. Moving on to rewards and upgrades, there are a few different resources in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters: seeds, servitors, prognosticars, grimoires and requisitions. You can get all of them except prognosticars when completing missions on a planet, but the ones I want to focus on at the moment is requisitions, seeds and grimoires. Whilst you play the campaign, you will earn requisitions in a few different ways. During your playthrough you will have meetings with Grandmaster Kai, and at the end of those meetings you will have options where to put your requisitions. These are for recruiting better knights, ranged weapons, melee weapons, armour and war gear. At the end of a combat mission, you will be presented with random options from the Armory of Titan in those categories. They cost requisition to purchase and they have 3 different tier levels in quality. The way it works is there's a certain amount of different gear from the Armory of Titan, but each of those has 3 different tier levels. As you add requisitions to the end of each meeting, you get a chance to get better tiers of certain items. For example, you might get a tier 1 crack grenade as one of your rewards, however if you upgrade the war gear access, you may get a tier 2 one. This same principle can be applied to all 5 categories. In terms of rewards, I am very impressed with how much the developers have put in for the Grey Knights regarding their gear. From force weapons such as halberd, sword, demon hammer, bolt weapons such as the side cannon, flame weapons such as the incinerator, also weapons like the silencers. You then have frag, crack and psycho grenades, which shows me they've done their research with the Grey Knight Codex. They also have servo skulls that can heal, pluck seeds and damage enemies. They haven't cut any corners. Now weapons and armour are a little bit different because they have upgrade options in certain stats. For armour, this could potentially increase the willpower, health, armour value, critical hit chance, etc. And for weapons, it could be ammo, damage, buffs against certain enemies, increased hit chance or crit damage, etc. This is where seeds come into play again, as they are traded for a certain amount to give armour and weapons purity seals, which will upgrade the gear in that certain stat. Like how I mentioned earlier, there are 5 different types of seed which are represented by a different colour, and the upgrade will show which colour they require. Another use for seeds is being used for research with Inquisitor Vikir. This research covers a few different areas. The main one being that seeds are used to progress the campaign. This could be continuing the story or trying to find Reapers, which are boss battles. In the research, seeds can be used for upgrading. This could be reducing the cost of the amount of seeds required on weapons or armour upgrades like I just mentioned. Research can be used to get more stratagems for combat to choose from. One great thing about Vikir's research is it's very rare you will unlock everything in one playthrough, so there's some replayability there. When Vikir researches something, it takes a few days to complete. You can upgrade this research by increasing the amount of grimoires you have on the ship. Before I finish on upgrades, I want to talk quickly about the abilities on knights. There are different Grey Knight classes such as Purgator, Justicar, Apothecary, Chaplain and a few more. Each class has different skill trees which present a wide range of abilities that let you do different builds. For example, classes like the Purgator have upgrades suited to ranged weapons like more ammo, allowing you to support fire or return attacks when getting hit. There are some classes that give knights access to Terminator armour, more gear slots, increased willpower for using abilities. There's a lot of choice. It's also very rare that you will have a fully unlocked knight, so it allows for different builds and playthroughs. Remember when I mentioned earlier that you can get missions that are too hard due to power balance? Well, you have an option to send a knight back to Titan for some requisition. This can then be spent on recruiting a knight with more experience. Let's talk about the ship. The Baleful Edict is your main hub, and it provides many different roles that coincide with other mechanics in the game. It's how you travel to different planets, where your knights heal after combat, and it's also your lifeline of the campaign, and if it gets destroyed, it's game over. This is why it's so important to look after it. At the start of the campaign, your ship's damaged and you need to maintain and fix it. The Baleful Edict is broken down into 3 areas, which are support systems, defense systems, and personnel systems. You can probably guess what each cover, but they have 4 things you can upgrade in each. The Baleful Edict uses the currency servitors, and you can get them as a reward for missions and certain encounters. You use servitors to purchase upgrades, and when you first start, it can be overwhelming in knowing what to purchase as you're unsure what each of these do. This is more of an issue in the encounters in my personal opinion, which I will get to. Some upgrades require you to have others purchased first before you can select them. This is things like the Exterminatus, as it's a late game tool. It's extremely rare to use, and it completely blows up a planet, and I love the details with the cutscene matching the planet you blow up. Someone will have to let me know if you can use an Exterminatus on a boss battle, because that seems like an easy way to kill a Reaper.
What is that I smell? More from above? I am not ready!
Each upgrade takes a certain amount of days to complete, and you can keep track of this with the game's timer. Support systems is how Operation the Baleful Edict is. They have all these fancy Warhammer names, but you can sum it up as unlocks better shit, gets more servitors, increases Vikir's research speed, and increases the speed of the ship. For defense systems, you have increased the health of the ship, increased the guns on the ship, a big fat explosion, and restore the ship's health to full. For personnel systems, you have increased the amount of knights you can hold, and when you recruit one, they have a higher ranking, meaning that more of their skill tree will be fleshed out. Increase the amount of XP knights gain in combat, heal the Grey Knights faster, and prognosticars, which are the last resource. Prognosticars are psychers, and in-game they are used as a one-time tool to give you advantages on certain areas on the star map. If you use a prognosticar in an area, it will do a few things. Firstly, it will reduce the bloom on the planets in that area, it will increase the amount of time before the bloom takes hold of a planet, when you go into a mission it will give you extra stratagems to use, and it gives you more details about the mission, like what enemies you'll be fighting. For those of you that have played Mechanicus with the exploring part of the game, Chaos Gate Demon Hunters has a very similar version of that. I'm calling them encounters, but they probably have a name for it. What happens is, you're presented with a scenario by one of the characters, be that Kai, Vikir, Lunette, and Ektar. They will offer you 4 choices most of the time, and you have to pick one of the options you feel is best. Resources, requisitions, seeds, grimoires, prognosticars, and servitors all have the chance to be denied or gained depending on the decision you make. On top of that, knight's health and ship health can be damaged. No! And then benefits from Vikir, Ektar, and Dominus all have the chance to be taken away or buffed. There's a lot of variety, but the best way I can describe it is you're playing a D&D campaign and presented with an encounter, and the developers have put loads of encounters in, far too many to count. Some that really stood out to me was the Space Hulk by either sending knights in or blowing it up, Kai requesting to send knights on a crusade to prove themselves, meaning you'll be down some knights, or sending a single knight off to become a paladin, a knight coming back from a crusade with the trait Deathless, meaning they can't die. I genuinely can't give enough credit to the developers. Some of the options are even locked off to you if you don't meet the requirement, like if your knights are injured. There's also certain encounters that are introduced if you need some support. For example, if you're low in servitors, an encounter that can provide more will become available, and it's really fun to decide whether to exchange a mastercrafted weapon for that resource, or to use the Inquisitor's authority to get what you want with a possible side effect. It's brilliant. There's ship-to-ship battles that all provide different scenarios, from boarding parties to frontal assaults and ambushes. This is where I do get a little bit confused about how gun batteries work, because does a level 2 counter a level 2, or does it have a different effect? I mean, I wish that was made a little bit more clearer. Overall, massive props to the developers for the amount of mechanics they have in this turn-based game, but I think what really sets it apart is how they intertwine all these mechanics together. That's impressive. My experience of Chaos Gate DaemonHunters was a fair one. I played on standard as I always feel it's worth playing the game the way the developers intended, and I started the campaign very poorly. It took me a while to get used to the mechanics and the combat like everyone else, and I fucked up quite a bit and actually did lose the campaign, which resulted in me restarting at a previous checkpoint. I then focused on getting my servitors and prognosticars upgraded, realising how important they were. I chose the chaplain over the librarian, and from there things went great and I started to understand how the game is meant to be played and respected, keeping Morbus Gates down and Vikir happy, because stratagems are too important.
Speak up then, Commander! What say you to this Inquisitor's story?
Let's be honest, I'm a simp. If any of you want a tip, use the stratagem Word of the Emperor, because that's an instant get out of jail free card putting -3 stun on enemies. You can then just chain kill. It's very nice. I finished the campaign in just under 100 hours, obviously factoring in my fails and getting footage. I would say you're getting a solid 60 hours playtime easily. I will say, even though the game has a lot of replayability, it can become rather stale after a while. I did have a few FPS issues, mainly in the tutorial mission, but I was playing on max graphics. Even when I did turn it down, I do feel the game could have been a bit better optimised, as I was only getting 50 to 60 FPS max, but that might just be me. Now, Chaos Gate DaemonHunters had bugs, and possibly still does. Most of the time, I don't mind the odd bug, like an enemy glitching, the camera angles messing up, or a piece of terrain not falling over. However, I do have a problem with game-breaking bugs, like Grey Knights getting stuck, game freezes, and save files being corrupted in updates. That is unacceptable, and I had multiple freezes in Chaos Gate DaemonHunters, and I could not understand what the trigger was, but luckily the game does have autosaves. I did have one instance where my save files was corrupted, but fortunately I made sure to save regularly, so I went back to a previous save file. People quitting and leaving a bad review is more than justified, and this will affect my verdict personally, but I will make sure to take other factors from the developers into consideration as well. The game does not seem to have many Easter eggs or hidden missions as far as I'm aware, sadly, but it has a fair amount of achievements, but they're more about completing the campaign on Legendary or challenging yourself in different ways.
Is this really my entire existence? I need to go join Slaanesh, at least I get some action then.
The environments of Chaos Gate DaemonHunters are extremely varied from all the different planets you travel to. You might be fighting in a gothic church in the snow, a hab zone or hive city where humans used to live but it's become infected, a Forge World or Ministorum factory that's mutated, a sewage facility, or some Warhammer Fantasy looking graveyard. What I love as well is you don't usually see the same environment often, maybe 1 or 2 missions, as there are several church, factory and different environments for each one. Even if you do come back to the same environment, depending on how infected the planet is with the bloom will change how the environments look. You'll see Nurgle's garden reaching in through the warp with green goo and pus on walls and mouths and eyes showing. Of course there are some amazing story environments, but I don't want to talk about them due to spoilers. These environments are highly detailed, and I just spent ages in the game actually appreciating the work the artists have done. From Death Guard and Ultramarine drop pods in different positions, statues of the Emperor and Aquila, crashed Valkyries, destroyed Leman Rust tanks, they actually cost a lot to turn into terrain, it's not worth it. Sector Mechanicus Galvanic Servo Haulers, Miasmic Magnifier, Noctilith Crown, I love all the different types of terrain in this game. I almost forgot to mention the planets, need I say more? There are a lot of different effects in Chaos Gate DaemonHunters. Fire effects burn wonderful from both weapons and terrain. In missions you will notice snow falling, acid rain or sand blowing on your screen, sparks for when a bullet ricochets off armour, nice realistic blood effects. When there's a muzzle flash you'll see smoke, the lighting in the game casts shadows on buildings and units. You've got some blue lighting effects with smoke for the Grey Knight's weapons, which you will miss, but I'm slowing it down so you can appreciate them. Also, when weapons power up, you can see the reflection of the light on tiles. Exploding or damaging terrain is very defined with the initial blast, and then how it disturbs nearby terrain with ragdoll physics. You can see green effects for the Death Guard and also Nurgle abilities. In terms of music, it's a 0 out of 10 from me. I'm sorry, but the developers missed the opportunity to have a soundtrack based around a sloppity bar piper, and with myself being part Scottish, it's a true crime. I wanted to hear the ear rape that would have been a sloppity bar piper. Being serious, I really like the music in Chaos Gate Demon Hunters, and I'm not just talking about the combat, they integrate it correctly into each part of the game, setting the tone. For example, the soundtrack Ready the Squad before you go into a mission. You then have the soundtrack The Baleful Edict, which is set inside the strike cruiser with humming and hymns being played, almost as if the tech priests and prognosticars on the ship are quietly chanting. Each of the three characters, Vikir, Dominus and Ektar, all have their own personal soundtracks as well. Ektar sounds like the Grey Knights performing a ritual or meditating before they go into combat. Vikir's Inquisitor soundtrack sounds very military and corporal-like with the drums, and almost as if she's about to bollock someone. Lunette Dominus has a soundtrack that sounds like ancient machinery chiming and whirring into motion, which is very fitting. Now, the main combat soundtracks are perfectly good. They set the scene, but also don't overwhelm the other sound effects and voice acting, which is what I wanted. What I am going to say is one of the soundtracks for a boss battle is up there with Dawn of War and the Mechanicus OST easily. Definitely a worthy soundtrack. Let's talk about the voice acting. I'm glad more celebrities are getting involved in Warhammer. We've got Andy Serkis in Demon Hunters, Clive Standen in Space Marine 2. We need to shove Henry Cavill into a Primarch game right now. I don't think Andy as Grandmaster Kai was a bad performance at all, but seeing him sit in a chair all the time feels like a bit of a wasted opportunity, and personally I do feel the other voice actors push him out of the spotlight. He definitely has that hissing tone you would expect from a Grandmaster, and it's enjoyable to hear the politics between him and the others.
Surely my time is better spent on the edict, investigating the...
An excellent notion. We are all demon hunters after all, aren't we, Inquisitor? I will send what coordinates I can to your astropaths. Purge what you find there, without hesitation.
He has some snarky remarks and funny dialogue, but I would have liked to have seen Kai being used in a few more ways.
I commend you, Inquisitor. I did not think you capable of it.
Christopher Fairbank plays Ektar. There are moments in the campaign where you linger on his every word.
In death, at least his duty has finally ended. We should monitor this infestation carefully and judge where best to direct our forces while the Inquisitor pursues her answers. Failure will cost many souls.
But then you also hear the frustration of the voice actor come out, which I love to see.
You could have warned me at least.
I report to the chapter, not to you. Setbacks? Do you have any idea what
our intrusion did?
Lunette Dominus was played by RP Singh. One thing I do know about certain mechanical or robot voice actors is sometimes they edit their own voice for the audition when applying for the role. I know the voice actor for Emmett in Evolve did this.
I'll rip off your dick and beat you with it!
RP Singh plays Lunette perfectly with that non-emotional response to every situation.
That conclusion is uncertain, impractical. We possess no artifact capable of detecting such profane spiritual resonance.
However, they also gave a bit of flexibility to show the Mechanicus still have some emotion left.
Perhaps you would both benefit from a moment in the contemplation chamber.
By far though, Robin Addison as Vikir takes the show. She portrays one of the worst types of Inquisitors, with a tone that their authority should never be questioned, and she delivers those lines with such tenacity.
I am a sanctioned Inquisitor of the Ordo Malleus. It is not a request. Yes, exactly. Listen to the venerable tech priest. We can't waste time lamenting a few minor setbacks.
She also portrays the other emotions of Vikir very well.
No, I need a sample. Just a sample. Cease your prattle. We'll fall upon these reapers with the wrath of the God Emperor himself. It is nothing, Dominus.
When it comes to the Grey Knights themselves, they've given you a lot of choice. In the character creation menu, you can choose from 12 different unique voices.
Praise the Emperor.
Yes, Commander. The Emperor lights our path.
They can be given separate names, and will say all the generic voice lines throughout the game, like moving to cover.
On my way, it will be done. As you will.
As you will.
Shooting an enemy.
For Titan! For the Emperor! Firing on target!
Feel my wrath!
And thank the Emperor they have some getting hit and going down voice lines.
Is that all you can muster?
Victory is ours! I will end you!
When it comes to enemies, the voices of the Death Guard sound as I would expect. A deep tone, feeling depressed, and I'm glad they got different actors to add some variety in there. They could not have had Chaos Space Marines without this voice line.
Lapdogs of the false emperor! Grandfather, hear my call! Yeah! We have discovered the Blade God protect. We are the Death Guard, advanced sons of Barbarous. Full dog. We will not fail against this menace. Slaves of the false emperor. I am the symbol of plagues to come. Barbarous silver dolls. Shall we play together? Grandfather heeds my prayers. It is an enemy most worthy.
The same goes for demons. Plague bearers counting numbers is what I expect to hear, with an almost sad and eerie voice.
Death inevitable. 31.
Of course you have the cultist laughs as well that I've been playing throughout this video, and to be fair, I would expect a Nurgle cultist to be laughing their head off while facing a Grey Knight.
Charge! Charge!
Bosses also have distinct voices, which I won't go into detail of because of spoilers, but I love the Chaos Knight teasing the Grey Knights.
I've got your type knew no fear. An empty platitude it would seem.
The sound effects are perfect, and I think one that really stands out to me is you hear the different weight behind each unit. You hear the sounds of different powerful weapons hitting ancient armour. Glorious, and I think the sound of terrain being destroyed has so much weight behind it as well.
Beneath me.
I'm just going to spotlight a few more sound effects just to show off how well the sound team have done.
In bloodshed we save.
I have to talk about the menu. It gives me massive Space Marine vibes, and it's nice they went the extra mile when they didn't need to. I've heard a lot of people have mixed feelings about the art style of this game, but I don't know what people are complaining about. In my opinion, the developers have gone for an art style that's very respectful to the tabletop models. Take a look at the amount of different Plague Marines. They all have different designs with helmets, arms and bodies. Blightlord Terminators have different shields and armor designs to each other. Even the Hellbrutes have different models, despite being the same unit. Look, this one even has a cute little bell. The developers are giving you so much customization when it comes to the grey knights themselves, from different helmets, head details, shoulder pauldrons and the chest. I'm sure one of the developers now has a 5,000 point army of grey knights. Unpainted of course. Then again, they don't need to be. Death Guard armor looks like it's seen 1,000 battles with scratches, decaying and mutations from their god on show, like a mouth protruding from their belly or tentacles on show. Plague cultists have boils and flesh decaying. This guy even has a tube that goes into his belly. One criticism I do have is the texture of blood. I'm not a big fan of the polka dot look, however blood does look better on other units. The assets in this game all look great, they're highly detailed and nothing seems out of place. Do you know what really impressed me though? Is tearing apart an enemy using the precision targeting system, as it does change the model like cutting off an arm. Take the Chaos Knight, it has all its armor panels, but as it takes damage you start to see the skeleton of it. That's the details I like to see, but I think what takes the show for me is the Chaos Spawn. This beautiful looking asset that looks like women on dating apps in my area has multiple different models it can mutate into. On the surface you don't notice it much, but it's a lot of extra work, so fair play. When it comes to the Baleful Edict, the developers have decided to model a lot of the ship, and it definitely does pay off with the amount of details. It must have been a hard thing to do with only lore and novels to reference from. They make good use of these with cutscenes, which I'm surprised they went to the effort to for a turn-based game. Sure, the animations sometimes make the characters look like animatronics, and the lip syncing is off a little bit, but it does a great job of immersing you in the universe, and it's a million times better than that PowerPoint presentation that Warhammer Plus is offering. For the main characters, their assets look really well made, plenty of details. Also, whoever did the rigging and animation for Lunette Dominus did a great job. The eyes, mouth and monobrow moving in sync works well. In terms of animation in combat, I'm starting to feel really sorry for developers trying to animate a Space Marine. The shoulder pauldrons seem like the biggest pain in the arse to deal with. It's the only thing I need to mention, that you will notice the odd clipping if you pay attention, or sometimes with Terminator's heads.
Oh, I smell nice.
Animations for moving, shooting are fine. They have animations for healing, getting hit, flinching and dying as well. Many different animations for executions with different weapons which I've shown throughout the video, and using abilities. I also think they've done a very good job of bringing Nurgle to life. You've got things like the eyes being animated on bellies, little tentacles flicking about. Nurgle needs those to be presented, not just the colour green. We here at Poncha strive ourselves to be different. For one, we will always give love to UI artists when no one else does. And the developers at Complex Games have done an amazing job. The UI of Chaos Gate DaemonHunters is wonderful to appreciate. From just loading up the menu and looking at all the different campaign difficulties, you have some sick looking art made, just for campaign difficulty. Developers, if you're watching, please put your work up on ArtStation so I can praise individually. But that's just the menu. For the research tab, you're looking into a grimoire with skulls and chains showing, all the artwork they have for individual research. For the Baleful Edict, you've got a hologram when upgrading. When selecting the Glorious Deed, look at the details on this, or communing with a knight or sending one back to Titan. There's so much effort here that you'll just glance over without it being mentioned. In combat, they've done a great job with the UI, all down to the little details. Blue represents knights, green is Nurgle, and purple represents the warp, and they contrast really well with each other. You can see the profile of your knight, stats, and their abilities. Damage by weapons is clearly outlined also when an enemy dies. You can go into more details if needed. Movement tiles are there, but don't jeopardize the environments. One criticism I do have is AoE damage. With square bases and circle damage, it's not always clear if you're going to be hit or not. I know squares for AoE damage would have been unrealistic, but it might have been a better choice to make things more clear. Lines that indicate line of sight are done well. When a knight or enemy has a negative effect, you can see that by clicking on them, and then check the settings if you need to find out what it does. It probably was a huge amount of work, but the UI paid off. For settings, I'm glad they have a report bug option. It may not be the best sign, but I'm glad it's there. For languages, you've got a nice choice of the main ones. They don't have low Brit, which according to this guy is what I speak, so that's disappointing. To be honest, he's probably accurate. You've got scrollers for all the different volumes. They give you the option to turn off the camera for combat and for ship events. Brightness, V-Sync, motion blur, which I recommend you always have turned off. Graphics quality settings. You could easily play the game on low settings and have the same experience, as there's not actually much of a big difference between low and high. The rest of the settings is just the codex, which explains all the stats, resources, boons and afflictions. Most importantly is to look at the ship effects and crew conditions though. For those of you who don't know how I review Warhammer games, I look for 3 things. How well it introduced a new player to the lore and the game, how well the game is made, is it scummy at all with microtransactions or broken on launch, and finally, does it please Warhammer veterans or just people who are familiar with the IP. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters was hard for me to review, and I mean that. I spent ages on deciding it, and I think I have come to a fair conclusion. The game has no opening fluff, which means a new player will find it hard to grasp the IP. I like the idea though of not shoving it in their face and giving them different ways to learn it by talking to the characters. However, I do wish they spoke the whole sentence. I'm dyslexic, so you gotta meet me halfway. The game has a combat tutorial which is very much needed, but I do feel for the other mechanics in the game, a tutorial would have been beneficial. New players will find this game hard, however due to the XCOM style, I can't criticise on difficulty, more just explaining the mechanics. I do believe the game does become rather repetitive after a while, and if they had reduced the amount of time in missions, I think that would have been more appealing. 7 out of 10. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters had people complaining about the Twitch Items DLC, but I don't care about that. What I am going to say is the game launched unpolished, which led to game-breaking bugs for many. If the developers had done a few betas, let the game sit in the oven a little bit longer, I think it would have launched in a much better state. But on launch, it was unplayable for many. Combine that with the corrupt saves, it's a recipe for Nurgle's Cauldron. 5 out of 10. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters I think has set a new example of what I expect now from a Warhammer game. It's arguably one of the best Warhammer games out there when it comes to lore, content, characters and in general the IP. I am massively impressed. 10 out of 10 easily. Overall, I give Chaos Gate Demon Hunters on launch a 6 out of 10. However, I am not somebody to hold a grudge if I see effort and change being made, and complex games deserve that recognition. Since launch they gave all the items to everybody from Twitch. They have been listening to feedback, being transparent on Twitter, and putting out patches regularly fixing bugs. If they continue on this course, the game is for sure a 9 out of 10, and in my opinion will be up there with Mechanicus. I think the developers know they made a mistake on launch, and pounding that into the ground on them won't help. Learn from the mistake and move on. This was a big game, and I think they should all be very proud of what they've accomplished. I would love to see what else Complex Games has to offer. Personally, I would like to see them take the game in a few different directions. Option 1. Chaos Gate Demon Hunters The Trials of Tzeentch expansion. Based around Ecto's backstory, you fight against the Thousand Suns and the forces of Tzeentch, with some Death Guard enemies for the odd mission. With this expansion, you get access to a Grey Knight Dreadnought, which uses similar mechanics to the Hellbrute with customization and different playstyles. The story could be carrying on from the original game, or a prequel with similar mechanics but some different scenarios and environments. The main boss could be a Lord of Change, or Magnus if they had the resources to. Option 2. Chaos Gate Xenos Hunters. With Battle Sector taking the Tyranids, Mechanicus the Necrons, I would personally love to see Complex Games tackle the Death Watch versus Orcs. You still got a small group of elite fighters against waves of enemies. The game would implement some new mechanics, like conquering just one planet to find an Orc war boss instead of a solar system. Customization and combat would be the same, but you'd be fighting the Greenskins. They could have many new units, bosses could be the Squigoth, Gorkanaut and Morkanaut. They could even add the new Savage Orcs with the Squigosaur. Anyway, either of those I would like to see in the future. I've got many plans for future videos, and with Darktide being delayed, I'm thinking about doing 2 things. Doing an update video on the Unification mod, as they do have a lot of new things to cover, and possibly streaming to interact with you guys more. I do hate the long silences between videos, and I do hope some people would like to interact with me as well. Anyway, it's been Poncha, take care.
There is only the Emperor! He is our shield and protector! Stand with your brother!